Lucius was born into a world of excess, privilege, and unimaginable wealth. As the son of Emperor Commodus, he had everything most could dream of: power, luxury, and prestige. His name alone opened doors, and his position as heir to the Roman throne seemed to guarantee a future filled with glory. But that wasn't the whole story. His life was far more complex, and much darker than most would ever realize. Imagine being the child of one of the most notorious emperors in Roman history. Commodus, known for his cruelty and ego, wasn't just a ruler. He was a symbol of excess, of unchecked power, and his legacy cast a long shadow over those closest to him. Lucius, born into this world, could have lived a life of leisure and luxury, surrounded by wealth, flattery, and adoration. Yet, as you'll soon discover, there was something deeply unsettling about his upbringing. The life of a royal heir wasn't all about the grandeur you might expect. Lucius grew up with a father who was infamous for his tyrannical reign and his delusion that he was the reincarnation of Hercules. Commodus's cruelty was well known, and his violent rule terrified the empire. But even more terrifying was the grip he had over his family, especially Lucius. You might assume that as the son of such a man, Lucius's path would have been set. He was going to be the emperor, the next ruler of Rome. However, something far more sinister was at play, and it had everything to do with the arena, the gladiators, and the dark politics of the Roman Empire. Despite the wealth and power that could have been his, Lucius was kept out of the public eye for much of his early life. He wasn't groomed for the throne in the way you might think. Unlike many heirs who were trained for leadership, Lucius was often hidden from the public, kept behind the walls of the palace. It was as if his father, Commodus, feared something about his son. Perhaps his own insecurities as a ruler played a part in this decision, and with good reason. The world of ancient Rome wasn't just a battlefield for soldiers. It was a gladiatorial stage where politics, power, and survival were on display. Lucius's life was bound by the very rules of survival that made the arena a place of both glory and death. But what most don't know is that Lucius was never really given a choice. He was thrust into the world of gladiators, a world where life was cheap and death was an inevitable part of the game. And yet the question remains: why would the son of a powerful emperor, who had every opportunity to rule, willingly step into such a brutal world? This leads us to an unsettling thought. Could Lucius have been more than just a victim of fate? Was he truly a prince trapped in the shadows of his father's dark legacy? Or was there a deeper reason behind his path to the arena? Perhaps Lucius's story wasn't just about being forced into a gladiatorial life. It was about survival, and in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, survival could mean anything. But let's hold that thought for now, because the truth is more twisted than we could imagine. By now, you're probably asking yourself how Lucius could possibly have ended up in the gladiatorial arena. The idea of a prince trained to rule, fighting for his life in the blood-stained sands of the Colosseum seems unbelievable, doesn't it? How could a royal heir, with the power of Rome at his fingertips, be reduced to fighting for his life in such a way? Well, the answer is more complex than just a simple story of a son forced into it. Lucius's path was paved with both personal and political reasons, and in many ways, he was manipulated by the very empire he was supposed to rule. The question of his true motivations remains unanswered by many scholars. Was it a form of punishment, or was it a secret political move that would guarantee his survival in the violent world of Roman power? The arena wasn't just a place of bloodlust. It was a political battleground where reputations were made and lives were taken, all for the amusement of the people. But here's the twist. Gladiators weren't just tools of war or spectacle. They were political pawns. Lucius, forced into this brutal life, quickly realized that the arena was more than just a fight for survival. It was about positioning, influence, and the chance to control the narrative. The public adored gladiators, and they were revered almost as celebrities. But for Lucius, the stakes were higher. His survival didn't just depend on winning in the arena. It depended on how he could manipulate his reputation and his newfound power. This is where it gets even more interesting. Lucius's life was not solely defined by blood and sweat. No, it was about a struggle for identity. As he fought both in the arena and in the political chaos of Rome, Lucius found himself grappling with his true nature. Was he simply Commodus's son, destined to follow in his footsteps, or was he forging his own path, despite the shadow of his father's legacy? But there's a problem with this theory. While Lucius might have seen the arena as a means to an end, as a place where he could carve out a new future for himself, the brutality of it all began to take its toll. The more he fought, the more his humanity seemed to slip away. His journey from prince to gladiator wasn't just physical, it was a transformation of his very soul. And here's the kicker. The man who was supposed to rule an empire became a symbol of something entirely different. The people no longer saw him as a prince. They saw him as a gladiator, a fighter, a man who would stop at nothing to survive. But did he truly embrace this new identity, or was it forced upon him? Was he a victim of his circumstances, or was he playing a game far more dangerous than anyone realized? By now, you're probably wondering, how could a man born to the highest station in life end up in the blood-drenched sands of the Colosseum? What led Lucius to embrace a life where every day could be his last? The answer lies in the dark, complex world of ancient Roman politics, a world where survival often meant sacrificing everything you thought you knew about yourself. In the next sections, we'll dive deeper into the shocking truths of Lucius's life and explore how the world of gladiators wasn't just about combat, but about survival survival, manipulation, and ultimately power. Stay with me, because the story of Lucius the Gladiator Prince is only just beginning. Imagine growing up as the child of an emperor who believes he is a god. You're surrounded by luxury, wealth, and power, more than most could ever dream of. But beneath that gleaming surface there's a darkness. Your father's madness casts a long shadow, and your future is never what it seems. This was the life of Lucius, the son of Commodus. Commodus wasn't just a ruler. He was a brutal figure whose name became synonymous with cruelty and ego. He reveled in violence, and, in a strange way, he believed that his reign was divine. But Lucius, his son, would grow up knowing only fear and danger. While the world saw Commodus as an emperor, Lucius saw him as something far more terrifying. As his father's actions spiraled out of control, Lucius was caught in the storm, a prince with everything yet nothing at the same time. You might think that Lucius's life was just a gilded existence of wealth and power, but that's where the story begins to turn dark. Imagine, instead of being groomed to rule, Lucius was kept in the shadows, hidden away from public view. Why? The answer lies in the very nature of his father's reign. Commodus was not a father in the traditional sense. He was a tyrant, and his rule was so unstable that even his own son couldn't be allowed to fully step into the light. Now let's take a closer look at what this really meant for Lucius. You might be thinking, how bad could it have been for a prince to grow up in such luxury? Well, the answer may surprise you. Lucius's life was anything but carefree. Despite being the heir to the most powerful empire in the world, he was trapped by the very bloodline that gave him his title. Commodus's sanity and cruelty were not just public affairs, they were family affairs too. Lucius's mother, the people of Rome, and even those closest to the emperor knew something had to be done about Commodus. But what about Lucius? What was his role in all this? And how did his father's madness affect his future? The truth is, the sins of Commodus were handed down to his son in ways few could imagine. Lucius, despite his royal blood, found himself in the most unlikely of situations, one that would forever change the course of his life. It's hard to believe, but Lucius, the son of an emperor, was forced to live in his father's shadow, not just as a prince, but as a potential pawn in a political game. Commodus's reign of terror would have lasting effects on Lucius. It was a toxic inheritance, and it wasn't just about avoiding assassination attempts. Lucius was dealing with far more than that. What you might not know is that Lucius's upbringing was carefully controlled, manipulated, and, at times, even cruel. Having been raised away from the public eye, hidden behind closed doors. Was this a precaution, a way to protect him from his father's enemies? Or was it a way to prevent Lucius from ever gaining the power that his name and birthright promised him? Here's the thing most people don't realize. Even though Lucius had everything that should have made him a future ruler, it was precisely because of his father's reign that he had to be hidden. Lucius wasn't just an heir, he was a symbol of the empire, and that made him dangerous. Commodus knew that if anything were to happen to him, his son could easily become a target, or worse, a pawn for those who sought power in his stead. But it's not just about power and threats. Imagine the psychological toll of living in a palace, surrounded by wealth, and yet never being allowed to step into the light. While the empire basked in Commodus's image, Lucius was kept out of view. He was forbidden to fully embrace his royal status, constantly caught between the desire for a life of luxury and the fear of being consumed by the empire's violence. Or what would it feel like to be heir to a throne, but forced to live in its shadow? Lucius's story isn't just one of royal drama, it's a tale of survival, and the key to his survival lay in the most unexpected place, the gladiatorial arena. Yes, you heard that right. Lucius, the son of an emperor, would end up fighting in the very same blood-stained sands that many of Roma's greatest heroes and villains once did. This wasn't just about combat, it was about the brutal game of survival, power, and influence that governed Roman politics. But why would a prince, a son of an emperor, choose to risk his life in such a brutal arena? It doesn't make sense at first, does it? A man with royal blood should never have to lower himself to fight like a common gladiator. But this isn't what you think. Lucius wasn't just fighting for glory, he was fighting for something far more important. His participation in the arena wasn't about honor. It was about ensuring that his life, his future, and perhaps even his soul remained intact. So, here's a question that will shake up everything you think you know about Lucius. What drove him to the Colosseum to fight for his life in the sand, drenched in the blood of his enemies? Was it a punishment, a form of retribution from his father? Or was it his only option in a world where survival meant playing by a completely different set of rules? Lucius's life was shaped by forces far beyond his control. His story isn't just about being the son of an emperor. It's about being caught in the machinations of a violent empire, where even a prince couldn't escape the dark legacy of his father's reign. There was much more at stake than just bloodshed. It was about identity, survival, and the ever-present shadow of Commodus's madness that threatened to consume everything Lucius could have become. As we dive deeper into Lucius's story, you'll begin to see the real stakes behind his gladiatorial career. It wasn't just about fighting for survival. It was about fighting for a future that wasn't bound by the twisted legacy of Commodus, but one that Lucius would have to carve out for himself, no matter the cost. To understand Lucius's journey, you first have to grasp the dangerous world of Roman politics. Ancient Rome wasn't just a place where emperors ruled. It was a kingdom of survival, alliances, and betrayals. Power wasn't inherited. It was earned through manipulation, conquest, and, at times, bloodshed. Lucius, though born into to royalty, had to navigate this cutthroat world, a world where every political move carried a potential death sentence. You might think that Lucius, as the son of Commodus, would naturally step into the throne room, prepared to lead the empire. But the reality was far more complex. In Roman politics, bloodlines alone weren't enough. The empire was a brutal, unforgiving arena, and even emperors could be dethroned or killed. Commodus's reign had already set the stage for chaos, and Lucius, caught in the midst of it all, found himself not simply a prince, but a player in a much darker game. The first key point to understand is that Lucius's life wasn't just about surviving as an heir. It was about surviving in a world where death could come at any time, from any direction. This meant playing the game of power, not just within the palace, but out in the streets of Rome and in the military. To understand the pressure he was under, think about it like this. Lucius wasn't just groomed to rule, but to survive against the very forces trying to take him down. For all the wealth and luxury he had, Lucius was born into a trap. Commodus's reign was one of violence and instability. Commodus, once a powerful emperor, had surrounded himself with enemies. Some of them were his allies, others were plotting against him. But for Lucius, this was a double-edged sword. He wasn't just the son of a powerful emperor, he was a target. The Roman elite didn't trust Commodus, and by extension, they didn't trust his son either. And here's the first twist. Instead of being protected and trained for power, Lucius was hidden in the shadows of Rome's high society. His life, which should have been one of grandeur, became one of constant danger and intrigue. Why was Lucius kept out of the public eye? Why wasn't he allowed to inherit the mantle of emperor as his father had? What many people don't realize is that Lucius's fate wasn't solely determined by the death of his father. It was shaped by the game of Roman politics, a game where the stakes were as high as the power and as deadly as any gladiatorial contest. Commodus's power was already eroded, and Lucius, though his heir, was caught in the fallout. It was only a matter of time before the threat of death loomed over him. And this wasn't just about family rivalry. It was a battle for control over the empire. In this world, even the most powerful were vulnerable. Lucius's royal blood didn't guarantee him a safe passage to the throne. His journey to power wasn't just about being a prince. It was about positioning himself in a world where no one could be trusted and where every ally could easily become an enemy. In Rome, you couldn't trust anyone, not even your own family. Power was in constant flux, and the key to survival wasn't just strength, it was manipulation. But there's something else that people often overlook. While Lucius' life may have been defined by danger, it wasn't just about surviving power struggles. It was about mastering the art of politics. Lucius didn't just have to fight to stay alive. He had to learn how to maneuver, how to understand the shifting alliances, how to play both sides to his advantage. In a sense, he wasn't just born into the game. He had to learn how to play it, and fast. The world Lucius was navigating was filled with layers of betrayal, intrigue, and secrecy. To the outside world, Lucius's story was one of survival. For those within the Roman elite, it was about understanding how to survive the chaos that had come to define the empire. How could Lucius gain control in a world where every decision he made could be his last? And what choices did he have left when every path seemed to lead to danger? It's easy to think that Lucius was simply following in his father's footsteps, but Lucius wasn't just a pawn in his father's game. He was a player in his own right, forced to adapt to the treacherous world of Roman politics. The brutal truth is that while Commodus's reign was filled with power struggles and violence, Lucius had to survive a far different set of rules, a set of rules that had far more at stake than just his own life. Now, here's where things get really interesting. As Lucius began to understand the game of power, he wasn't simply fighting for survival anymore. He began to see something much bigger. This wasn't just about protecting himself from his enemies. It was about using his position, his reputation, and his royal blood to control his own fate. But how could he do that when he was forced to live in the shadows, forced into an arena designed for death? To truly understand Lucius's path, you need to understand that Rome was more than just a city, it was a battlefield. This wasn't just about who controlled the Senate or the throne. It was about survival, reputation, and the brutal fight for control over the empire. Lucius's journey wasn't just about ruling. It was about playing the game of politics where survival wasn't guaranteed, and every ally could become a traitor. And here's the twist. Even as a prince, Lucius had no guarantee that his birthright would save him. The game of Roman politics was a deadly one, where even the most powerful could be overthrown. Lucius had to adapt quickly. He couldn't afford to be just a prince anymore. He had to become something else entirely. But was that something worth the cost? Could Lucius really survive this deadly game, or was he just another victim of his father's cruel reign? Stay tuned, because Lucius's path is just beginning. Imagine stepping into the gritty, brutal world of gladiators. Picture the blood, the sweat, the roar of the crowd, and the scent of iron in the air. Now, imagine a royal heir, a prince with wealth, power, and a future filled with potential, suddenly cast into this very world. Lucius, the son of the infamous Commodus, was trained not to rule an empire, but to fight for his life. Lucius's journey into the gladiatorial world wasn't some accident of fate. It was a necessary survival tactic. But did he truly embrace this violent new life, or did he resist it at every turn? It's easy to assume that Lucius, with his royal blood, would have rejected the brutal training training and fought to retain his position in the palace. After all, gladiators weren't supposed to be princes, but in ancient Rome, the rules of power weren't as simple as birthright and status. The politics of survival in the empire were far darker than you might think. When Lucius entered the gladiatorial world, he didn't just sign up to fight. He entered a harsh training system designed to break men down and rebuild them into deadly weapons. Gladiators weren't just trained for battle, they were trained to survive in an unforgiving world. What they endured wasn't just physical, it was psychological, and this intense training shaped them in ways few could imagine. Lucius's journey in the gladiatorial world was far from easy. Despite his royal upbringing, he was forced to adapt to an environment where every day was a fight for survival. Gladiatorial training wasn't about honor or glory, it was about mastering the art of death. The arena wasn't a place of sport, it was a place where men were made into killers. Each gladiator had to survive brutal combat, endure unimaginable hardships, and most importantly, outlast the others. But what's fascinating here is that Lucius's training went far beyond just learning how to fight. Gladiators were trained to think on their feet, to be clever and resourceful, and to understand the complex politics of the arena. Survival in the Colosseum didn't just rely on physical strength. It required wit, strategy, and an understanding of how to manipulate both the crowd and fellow fighters. It was a deadly game, and Lucius learned quickly that in the gladiatorial world, every move counted. What might surprise you is that Lucius's training wasn't all about brute strength. Gladiators also needed a set of skills that went beyond fighting, skills that would help them navigate the treacherous politics of Rome. Gladiators were public figures, entertainers and pawns in the hands of the elite. And Lucius, despite his royal blood, was no exception. He had to learn how to use the arena to his advantage, not just for survival, but for power. Here's something that might change your perspective. While many see gladiators as mere fighters, they were also a means of control. They were used to distract, manipulate, and even sway the public's opinion. Lucius wasn't just learning how to fight for his life in the Colosseum. He was learning how to use his position to gain influence, not just in the arena, but in the wider game of Roman politics. This is where Lucius's path becomes even more interesting. He wasn't just a gladiator, he was a royal heir who had learned to survive the brutal world of combat. And in doing so, he was forced to shed his former identity and adopt a new one. Lucius had to adapt to a world where fighting wasn't just a matter of physical survival. It was a matter of reputation, alliances, and manipulation. Gladiatorial training was the first step in his transformation from a prince to something much darker. The question you might be asking now is this: did Lucius embrace this gladiatorial life, or was he simply playing a dangerous game of survival? Could a prince born into wealth and power really transform into one of Rome's most brutal fighters? And perhaps most importantly, what did this transformation cost him? As we dive deeper into Lucius's story, we start to realize that the gladiatorial world wasn't just about violence and fame. It was about survival in a system designed to break you. Lucius, as a prince, was expected to rule, to command respect. But in the arena, respect was earned differently. It was earned through strength, cunning, and the ability to survive each fight, each moment. The transformation he underwent wasn't just about learning to fight. It was about learning how to survive in a world where your title meant nothing, and your ability to win, to manipulate, and to endure were the only things that mattered. But Lucius's training wasn't the only challenge he faced. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were entertainers. Their battles weren't just about winning, they were about putting on a show. And in Rome, a show meant more than just victory. It meant making a statement, winning the crowd's favor, and, most importantly, staying alive. Lucius's ability to read the crowd, to know what they wanted, would become one of his greatest assets. You might be wondering at this point, how could a prince used to the comforts of royal life ever truly fit into such a brutal, dehumanizing world? The answer isn't as simple as just saying he adapted. Lucius didn't just survive his gladiatorial training, he used it as a means of transforming himself into someone completely different. A man who could navigate both the blood-soaked sands of the arena and the political intrigue of the Roman elite. Now, let's take a moment to consider a strange fact. Gladiators weren't just trained to fight, they were trained to think like soldiers, like politicians, like survivors. And Lucius, though a prince, had to learn how to survive in this world of manipulation, power, and fame. This wasn't just about physical combat, it was about mastering the art of survival, and the arena was the perfect place to do just that. So the next time you think about Lucius, the gladiator prince, remember this: his training was about far more than just preparing him for battle. It was about transforming him from a royal heir into a survivor, a manipulator, and a master of the brutal game of power that defined ancient Rome. And the question remains, did Lucius fully embrace this life, or was he simply using it as a stepping stone to something far greater? In ancient Rome, reputation was everything, and the arena was the ultimate stage for anyone seeking to make a name for themselves. For Lucius, the son of the infamous Commodus, this meant more than just surviving the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum. It meant transforming from a royal heir into something more. Lucius's battles weren't just about life or death, they were about how he would be remembered. Would he rise from the shadows of his father's cruelty, or would he be consumed by the very world that had threatened his existence? Most people think gladiators were just fighters, slaves destined for death, but the reality is that many gladiators were also celebrities in their own right. They were adored by the masses and feared by their enemies. But Lucius's path wasn't wasn't simply about becoming famous. He was a prince with everything to lose and everything to gain. Was he truly a gladiator at heart, or was he simply playing a part to survive the deadly game of Roman politics? The truth might surprise you. Imagine this: Lucius, born into the royal family, forced to fight in the Colosseum. His reputation was at stake, but there was more on the line than just survival. In the arena, reputation wasn't just something you gained over time. It was something that could make or break you in an instant. If Lucius wasn't careful, his reputation could either elevate him to power or seal his fate. Here's the interesting part: Lucius wasn't the typical gladiator. Gladiators were usually common men, slaves or criminals, fighting for their freedom. But Lucius had already earned the title of heir to an empire, power, wealth, and the potential for greatness. But in the eyes of Rome, those things didn't matter in the arena. Lucius had to prove himself all over again. His fight wasn't just to survive. It was to prove he could fight for respect, for admiration, and ultimately for control over his destiny. So what made Lucius different from other gladiators? While most gladiators fought for fame, freedom, or survival, Lucius fought for something even deeper. He had to prove that he could rise above the shadow of his father's violent legacy. Commodus, his father, was a brutal emperor, a man loved by few and hated by many. Lucius's reputation as his son made him an easy target, a symbol of the very cruelty he was trying to escape. How could he break free from that shadow? How could he transform himself from the son of a tyrant into a man worthy of respect? The path to reputation was not easy, even for a prince. Gladiators in Rome were expected to entertain, to fight with honor, and to entertain the masses. Some made their mark by fighting fierce beasts, others by battling other gladiators. But Lucius' challenges were different. He didn't just need to fight. He needed to survive a political game far more dangerous than any battle in the arena. He had to prove his worth, not just to the crowd, but to those who controlled the empire. As Lucius fought for his life in the Colosseum, he wasn't just fighting to prove his worth as a warrior. He was fighting to reshape his identity, to carve out a future where he could escape the stigma of his father's cruelty. The people of Rome didn't care about Lucius' royal blood. They only cared about what he could do in the arena. And as every fight grew more intense, Lucius learned that his reputation as a fighter would be his most powerful weapon. The problem was, with every victory came a heavier burden. Could Lucius truly gain respect, or would he be trapped in the same cycle of violence and death that had consumed his father's reign? The crowds, the political figures, the Senate, and even his own enemies all had a hand in shaping his image. Lucius could fight as hard as he wanted, but without the right narrative, he might remain a mere pawn in someone else's game. To gain true respect, Lucius had to navigate the complex politics of the arena and beyond. He wasn't just fighting for personal glory, he was fighting for his future. This leads to a strange truth about gladiatorial fame. It was fleeting. Gladiators could rise to fame in a single battle, only to be discarded when they no longer served a purpose. Lucius wasn't just playing for survival, he was playing for power. The arena was his testing ground, but he knew that the true battle would come later, in the courtrooms and palaces of Rome, where reputation could make or break an emperor. Now, consider this rare fact: gladiators weren't just fighting in the Colosseum. They were part of a complex system of patronage and manipulation. They were celebrities, yes, but they were also tools of the elite. And this had to understand this delicate balance of survival in the arena and political maneuvering outside it. Fame in the arena could lead to power, but it could also lead to destruction. For a prince like Lucius, his reputation in the Colosseum could be the key to his survival or his downfall. So, as Lucius faced each brutal opponent, he was not just fighting for survival, he was fighting for control over how he would be remembered. He was crafting a reputation, one that would either free him from his father's shadow or ensure he was forever bound by it. The real question was, could Lucius turn the reputation of his father, once a symbol of fear, into something that could make him the ruler he was always meant to be? This is where the true complexity of Lucius' story begins. The arena wasn't just a place of death, it was a place of transformation. But as Lucius learned, reputation wasn't just about winning battles, it was about knowing when to fight and when to play the game. Would he win the respect of the people, or would he be remembered as just another pawn in Rome's deadly game of power? Lucius's journey was never meant to be that of a typical Roman prince. Raised in the shadow of his infamous father, Commodus, Lucius was bound by a complicated legacy. Commodus ruled with brutality, indulging in a delusion of godhood, and infamously believing that he, not the Senate, controlled Rome. Lucius, by contrast, had the unique pressure of being born into that blood-soaked empire, overshadowed by his father's madness. But while most people think that Commodus's cruelty destroyed his family, the reality is far more complicated. Imagine this: Lucius, the son of a tyrant, thrust into the dangerous world of gladiatorial combat, born to rule, but forced to fight for survival. How did his father's reign shape his destiny in the most unexpected of ways? How did Lucius, a royal heir, find himself becoming a gladiator? The twist here is not just about power, but survival, and what it truly meant to carry the name Commodus. The young prince's entry into the arena wasn't a simple case of rebellion or youthful recklessness. In fact, it wasn't even truly about a loss of status. For Lucius, the gladiator's life became his way of navigating a political minefield, a survival strategy that forced him to engage in the deadly game of Rome's political struggles. And the first challenge came not from the arena itself, but from the legacy he inherited. What if I told you that the real enemy wasn't the men he faced in combat, but the shadow of his father, Commodus, hanging over him? Lucius was not just fighting for his life in the Colosseum. He was fighting to redefine his identity in a world that viewed him only through the eyes of his father's violence and cruelty. Commodus's name was poison, and Lucius's every move was watched by the elite, by the Senate, and by the Roman people who still trembled under the memory of his father's reigns. Lucius found himself in a strange limbo, too royal to be a mere gladiator, too much a gladiator to be a true prince. Was he truly a fighter, or was he simply playing a role? Was his sword a symbol of rebellion, or was it a shield protecting him from a far more dangerous battle, one of political survival? He was the son of an emperor, yes, but in the brutal world of gladiatorial combat, no one cared about bloodlines. In the arena, Lucius had to prove his worth, not as the son of Commodus, but as a man worthy of his own place in history. The arena was Rome's true stage of survival, and Lucius soon realized that reputation meant everything. But here's the twist. His reputation wasn't just about his prowess in battle. In the Colosseum, your reputation was as fragile as the sword you wielded. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and your name could be forgotten forever. But if you managed to survive the deadly spectacle, you could rise to unimaginable heights. Gladiators, like the ones Lucius faced, were not simply pawns in the emperor's game. They were more than just warriors. They were symbols, icons of strength, symbols of Rome's indomitable will. But Lucius wasn't just fighting for fame or respect. He was fighting to shed the weight of his father's name and prove that he could be something more than the monster that Commodus had been. But here's the thing, Lucius couldn't escape his father's legacy. The sins of Commodus were ingrained in every interaction Lucius had. Everywhere he went, there were whispers about his bloodline. Commodus's violent reign was too fresh in the minds of the people. The political tension in Rome meant that Lucius was viewed with suspicion, even hatred. The question remained, could Lucius ever escape the shadow of his father's madness, or would he forever be bound by it? But the real story behind Lucius's time in the arena wasn't just about surviving brutal combat. It was about playing the long game. Lucius's battles were more than physical. They were deeply political. In Rome, to be a gladiator wasn't simply to fight for personal glory. It was about controlling a narrative where Lucius could craft his future. In fact, many gladiators used their time in the arena to negotiate power behind the scenes. But Lucius' circumstances were different. He had a throne to inherit. The arena was Rome's ultimate proving ground, where politics, power, and reputation collided. The Colosseum wasn't just a place for gladiators to prove their physical prowess. It was where men tested their worthiness to rule. Lucius was playing for more than personal victory. He was playing to reshape the legacy of his family and the future of Rome. In the bloodied sands of the arena, Lucius found himself facing not only his opponents, but his own destiny as the heir to one of Rome's most notorious rulers. At the core of it all, Lucius's fight wasn't just about survival. It was about control. The fight for respect, reputation, and power was a dangerous game, and Lucius knew that each battle he fought in the arena was not just an opportunity for personal glory. It was a chance to reshape his own destiny. Each victory was a chance to break free from the shadow of his father. Each opponent he defeated was another step toward proving that Lucius was not just the son of Commodus, but a force to be reckoned with in his own right. Truth remains, Lucius didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. He had to be perfect. The politics of Rome were unforgiving. Every misstep could cost him everything. Every decision he made, both inside and outside the arena, would shape his future. Could Lucius prove that he was more than the sum of his bloodline? Could he rewrite his story, or would he be forever trapped in the myth of his father's cruelty? Only time and the battles in the Colosseum would reveal the answer. And here's the most controversial truth of all. Being a gladiator was not just about the fight. It was about surviving the system. For all his royal blood, was forced to play by the same rules as the common gladiators. But in doing so, he began to realize something that many didn't understand about the game of power in Rome. Survival wasn't just about defeating your enemies. It was about playing the game better than anyone else. Would Lucius be able to outsmart the system, or would he fall victim to it like so many before him? You'll see as the story unfolds. The Colosseum was one of the most iconic symbols of ancient Rome, a place where gladiators fought to the death, the arena soaked in blood, and the crowd roaring for more. But what if I told you the truth about the Colosseum is darker than you ever imagined? Lucius, son of the infamous Commodus, wasn't just another royal heir. He was dragged into this brutal world himself, and the secrets behind his time in the Colosseum go far beyond what you think. It's easy to imagine the Colosseum as just a space for entertainment, right? But what if it was a place of manipulation, a political tool far more sinister than anyone realized? The Colosseum was never just about the fight. Yes, it was the stage for brutal combat, but the real story goes deeper. Gladiators weren't simply warriors. They were tools of the state, pawns in a much larger game of control and power. Lucius, the young prince who had everything, was thrust into this world, not just to fight for his life, but to play a game far more dangerous than he ever imagined. When we think of gladiators, we tend to focus on the bloodshed, the physical struggle, and the fight for survival. But what if I told you that for Lucius, it wasn't just about surviving the arena? What if his role in the Colosseum was part of a larger, more political game? Gladiators were more than just combatants. They were entertainers, symbols, pawns pawns in a game that shaped the very heart of Roman society. For Lucius, the arena became a place of survival, but not just in the physical sense. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for his future, for his reputation, and to free himself from the shadow of his infamous father, Commodus. Imagine being born into a dynasty known for violence, cruelty, and madness. Now imagine being thrust into the very arena that symbolized all of those things. The arena wasn't just a symbol of Rome's glory, it was a symbol of its violence and corruption, and Lucius had no choice but to enter it. Behind the Colosseum's grand walls, the games were controlled by the Emperor Commodus. The ruler who had convinced the Roman world that he was a living god used the arena to further his own power, using gladiators like Lucius to entertain the masses while also solidifying his control. And Lucius, with his royal blood, was expected to play a role, one that went far beyond fighting. His participation in these blood-soaked games was not just about proving himself as a warrior. It was about controlling the narrative, shaping how Rome would remember him. Imagine what it must have been like to step into that arena as Lucius, knowing that your every move would be scrutinized, not just by the crowd, but by the most powerful men in the empire. The political ramifications of his actions were enormous. Every victory or defeat had a ripple effect far beyond the Colosseum's gates. The arena was a symbol of power, a place where public opinion was swayed, where reputations were made or destroyed. For Lucius, the battle for survival was as much about the games as it was about manipulating those who watched, those who ruled, and ultimately, the future of the empire. But here's where things get truly chilling. Lucius wasn't just fighting in the arena for sport. He was a pawn in a much larger game. Gladiators like Lucius were often used as instruments of propaganda, tools that could be exploited by those in power to achieve political ends. Commodus, himself a trained gladiator, used the arena to enhance his status, but it also had a darker side. The Colosseum wasn't just a place for physical battles. It was a place where power struggles played out in full view of the masses, and Lucius, by virtue of his bloodline, became part of that dangerous game. Here's a shocking truth. Lucius' role in the arena wasn't about his personal glory. It was about demonstrating power. Commodus used the gladiator games not only to entertain but also to solidify his image as a god. He had no qualms about forcing his son into the same bloodshed he reveled in. Lucius's time in the arena wasn't voluntary. He was forced into a role designed to further Commodus's reign. His father's influence was so deeply embedded in the Colosseum's dark walls that even the battle for Lucius's freedom wasn't just about escaping the arena. It was about breaking free from the toxic legacy of his father's rule. But what truly goes on behind the scenes of the Colosseum? You might think the gladiators just fought, trained, and lived for the next fight, but the reality is far more complicated. Gladiators were political tools, carefully manipulated by those in power. Lucius didn't just fight for survival, he fought for his freedom and his legacy. In a world dominated by violence, where every fight in the arena was a spectacle watched by millions, Lucius's fight wasn't just against other gladiators, it was against the very system that forced him into this bloody world. Lucius, trapped in this cycle of violence, had to navigate the politics of the arena carefully. A gladiator's reputation could make or break him, and for Lucius, every move in the arena had to be calculated. He had to prove not only his strength but also his worth to the people watching. Every fight was a chance to shape how Rome would see him. Was he Commodus' son, a symbol of his father's madness, or could he forge his own identity, separate from the blood-stained legacy of his father's reign? In the end, the Colosseum was never just about the bloodshed. It was about control, power, and survival. And Lucius's role in the arena was one of the most complicated of all. His fight wasn't just physical, it was deeply political, a battle to reshape his future and his place in the history of Rome. The arena, with all its blood and violence, became a stage for Lucius to rewrite his story and perhaps his destiny. It was a symbol of the very nature of Roman power, brutal, unforgiving, and driven by those who understood the real game being played behind the scenes. Lucius's time in the Colosseum wasn't just about surviving the physical battles. It was about navigating the complex political landscape of ancient Rome. And in that arena, his survival was just as much about playing the political game as it was about defeating his opponents in the sand. Freedom was the ultimate prize for every gladiator. Yet for Lucius, a prince born into the ruthless rule of his father Commodus, that fight for freedom was unlike anything you might expect. The arena was a brutal battleground, but the true challenge for Lucius wasn't just to win. It was to navigate the deadly world of Roman politics, where power and survival went hand in hand. What would it take for him to escape the shackles of his father's legacy? You'll be surprised by the choices Lucius made and the sacrifices he was forced to endure. Imagine the weight of being Commodus' son, not just a prince, but the son of a man who believed he was a living god, a man who used violence as his personal tool to rule. Lucius's entire life was overshadowed by his father's madness. His father, Commodus, had long since destroyed his own reputation in the eyes of the Senate. But for Lucius, there was always the looming question: could he ever break free of that darkness, or was he doomed to follow in his father's blood-stained footsteps? But here's the catch: Lucius was no ordinary son. While he was raised to inherit an empire, his true challenge wasn't just to rule. It was to escape the arena where his father's madness had placed him. His participation in the gladiator games was no mere punishment. It was a complex game of survival and political maneuvering. Lucius had no choice but to step into the Colosseum, the very symbol of Rome's power, and play by the rules of those who sought to control him. You might be thinking, why would Lucius, a prince, choose to fight in the arena? Here's the answer that will surprise you. Lucius didn't just fight for survival. Every moment in the arena was a calculated move in the greater game of power. It wasn't just about bloodshed, it was about politics. The games in the Colosseum were controlled by those in power, and to be a gladiator was to be controlled, to be made a pawn in a ruthless game. But Lucius wasn't an ordinary gladiator. He didn't fight just for fame or glory. He fought for freedom, for his future, and for his soul. Gladiators like Lucius had no real freedom. Yet in the brutal world of Roman politics, freedom came at a price, and Lucius was about to discover just how high that price could be. The arena wasn't just a place for gladiators to prove their strength. It was a place for emperors to prove their power, for families to assert their control, and for men like Lucius to fight for a chance to live on their own terms. Here's where it gets even more intriguing. Lucius's battle for freedom wasn't just against other gladiators. It wasn't even about his royal bloodline, though that certainly played a role in his struggles. No, his greatest battle was against the system itself, the deadly political landscape that had forced him into the arena. As Lucius' fame grew, so did his understanding that the only way out was not just through strength, but through manipulation and strategy. The Colosseum was a stage for more than just physical combat. It was a place where power could be claimed, lost, and redefined. Yet what you might not know is how those in control of the arena used it as a way to manipulate the public, bend political forces to their will, and sometimes even steer the course of Roman history itself. Gladiators were not just fighters. They were tools in the hands of emperors, senators, and powerful families. And Lucius, even though he was a prince, was no exception. He had to learn quickly that survival wasn't just about the battle in front of him. It was about surviving the deadly game being played behind the scenes. What truly sets Lucius apart from other gladiators is his understanding of this deadly game. He wasn't simply fighting for survival in the way other gladiators did. His battles were strategic, calculated. Each fight was not just about showing his strength, but about using the games to build his reputation, win the favor of the people, and most importantly, position himself as a potential rival to his father's legacy. The stakes were much higher than life and death in the arena. For Lucius, it was about shaping his destiny, and perhaps even reclaiming the power his father had squandered. Gladiators who won their freedom through victories in the arena were rare, but Lucius's path wasn't just about earning his freedom. It was about transforming himself into a force that could challenge the very empire that had ensnared him. He had to rise above the shadows of his father's rule, prove that he was capable of something greater, and make the ultimate sacrifice to escape the fate his bloodline had set for him. You're probably wondering, could Lucius really break free from the deadly grip of his father's empire? How could a man born into such a violent and politically charged world hope to survive when the odds were stacked so high against him? The answer to that question might just change everything you think you know about the Roman Empire. Lucius's fight wasn't just for his life. It was for something far more powerful, control over his own legacy, and the very future of Rome itself. By the time Lucius faced the final challenges of the arena, he would have to confront the full weight of his father's legacy. He was no longer just the son of Commodus, a prince destined for the throne. Now, Lucius had become something else, a gladiator, a warrior in a fight not just for survival, but for control, freedom, and the redefinition of his own power. His ultimate test would come not in the arena itself, but in his ability to manipulate the politics around him, and in doing so, perhaps change the course of history. As the arena echoed with the roars of the crowd, Lucius's story would become one for the ages, a story of a prince turned gladiator, fighting not just to stay alive, but to reclaim his future. And what he would ultimately prove is that sometimes the true battle is not fought with a sword, but with the ability to survive the most dangerous game of all, the game of power. The life of a gladiator isn't just about sword fights and brutal combat, it's about reputation. And for Lucius, son of the infamous Emperor Commodus, reputation was everything. But here's the twist, Lucius was no ordinary gladiator. Born into royalty, he had everything, except the freedom to live on his own terms. How does a prince destined for power end up fighting in the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum? And even more surprising, how does his reputation as a gladiator become the key to his survival and ultimately his freedom? The gladiatorial arena was more than just a sporting venue. It was a place of politics, power, and survival. Lucius didn't simply fight to stay alive. No, he fought to win something far more elusive, respect. In a world where power was won by strength, not words, Lucius had to prove himself as a warrior in a world where his royal blood meant nothing. And as he rose in fame, so did the dangers he faced, not only from the warriors around him, but from the very system that had placed him there in the first place. But there was more to this battle than meets the eye. Lucius wasn't just playing for personal glory. Every move he made in the arena was part of a larger strategy, an attempt to escape the shadow of his father's violent legacy and claim a future that was his own. But what made Lucius's journey so unique wasn't just his skill in battle, but the way he used the arena's politics to manipulate his fate. Here's where the story gets interesting. Gladiators could rise from nothing to fame and fortune, but the path wasn't always so clear. Many gladiators were left to die after their usefulness was exhausted. Could a prince like Lucius really defy the odds and escape the same fate? Could a man born into a life of luxury and excess ever truly embrace the harsh, unforgiving world of gladiatorial combat? Lucius's journey was far from simple. His fight wasn't just against opponents in the arena, it was against a system designed to destroy him. Lucius's rise in the arena was a surprising turn of events. While many gladiators entered the Colosseum because they had no other choice, Lucius's fight for respect was much more deliberate. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about mastering the game of power. And the Colosseum was the perfect stage for that game. It wasn't just a place of combat, it was a place where emperors and political figures made their mark, where power could be gained or lost in the blink of an eye. But for Lucius, the real battle lay in what happened off the sands of the arena. How did a royal heir become a gladiator in the first place? Was this his punishment, or was it a survival strategy designed to help him outsmart his enemies and climb his way back to power? Lucius's time in the arena taught him more than just the art of combat. It taught him how to navigate the political minefields of ancient Rome. Reputation, as Lucius would quickly learn, could make or break a man's career. In Rome, how the crowd saw you mattered more than anything else. But as the son of a ruthless emperor, could Lucius ever be seen as more than just the son of Commodus? Could he earn respect in the arena, or would he forever be haunted by the sins of his father? Despite the brutal nature of gladiatorial life, Lucius's battles in the Colosseum were his way of taking control over his destiny. Fame in the arena was fleeting. The people loved a hero, but they also loved to tear down those who had risen too high. For Lucius, surviving the games wasn't just about winning. It was about securing his place in Roman history, not as the son of a mad emperor, but as a man in his own right. And here's where the stakes really started to rise. Gladiators could gain fame, but that fame came with a price. Lucius's fame wasn't just a result of his victories in the arena. It was a reflection of the political game he was playing. As his reputation grew, so did the eyes that watched him. Was he a pawn in a larger scheme, or had Lucius truly become the master of his own fate? The arena was a dangerous place for anyone, but for a prince like Lucius, it was a place where the line between friend and foe was razor thin. Lucius's rise to fame in the arena wasn't just about the battles he fought, it was about the image he crafted for himself. Gladiators were often seen as mere tools, used for entertainment, their lives worth nothing more than the next fight. Lucius, however, understood that reputation was his currency in this brutal world. His image would determine not just his survival, but his ability to navigate the complex political landscape of Rome. Fame in the arena meant influence outside of it, and Lucius was playing that game to perfection. But here's the real twist. Lucius didn't just want to survive, he wanted something much more dangerous. He wanted to change the game itself. Was he truly a gladiator at heart, or was he a prince using the arena to take control of his own legacy? In a world where power was often won with blood, Lucius's greatest challenge wasn't just surviving the games, it was surviving Rome itself. The arena was the crucible where Lucius' reputation would be forged. But what kind of man would he become when the games were over? Could he break free from the shadow of his father's violent rule? Could a gladiator truly change his fate, or would he always be bound by the chains of his bloodline? Lucius's rise in the arena is a story of survival, politics, and ambition, but it's also a story of transformation, a story about a prince who fought not just for his life, but for his freedom, his future, and his place in the world. But in the brutal world of ancient Rome, that didn't mean much inside the Colosseum. The arena, a place of death and spectacle, was where he would fight for his freedom and his life. To survive, Lucius would need more than his birthright. He would need to prove himself as a warrior, a gladiator, in the most dangerous game in Rome. But here's the thing, fame in the arena wasn't just about surviving fights. It was a game of politics, reputation, and manipulation. And Lucius's reputation, his very identity, was at stake every time he stepped into the ring. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were tools. Tools for the entertainment of the masses, yes, but also tools for the power struggles behind the scenes. What most people don't realize about the gladiatorial games is how deeply intertwined they were with Rome's political system. Gladiators could rise from nothing to become symbols of power, but the cost was steep. Lucius's rise to fame wasn't just a matter of winning battles, it was about playing a political game that could ultimately decide whether he lived or died. Fame in the arena wasn't about just winning or losing, it was about surviving long enough to make an impression. Lucius's victories made him famous, but his reputation also made him a target. Gladiators were prized for their ability to entertain and survive, but those who outlived their usefulness were discarded without a second thought. But Lucius wasn't just another gladiator. Born into the violent and dangerous world of Emperor Commodus, Lucius' reputation as a gladiator was directly shaped by his connection to his father, a ruler known for his cruelty and madness. How could Lucius, the son of such a man, ever escape his father's shadow? As Lucius continued to rise in the arena, the question became, would he ever escape the political game that had been set in motion the moment he was born? Could he use the arena as a stepping stone to a life beyond gladiator fights? Or would he remain trapped in the deadly cycle of blood and politics? The answer, as we'll see, lies in the personal rivalries that Lucius faced. Gladiators didn't just fight beasts and criminals, they fought each other. The rivalries between gladiators were often more dangerous than the battles against wild animals. animals or condemned criminals. These rivalries were fueled by pride, ambition, and the unspoken rule that only the strongest survive. Lucius faced some of the fiercest gladiators of his time. Some of them were fighting for their own survival, while others, like Lucius, were fighting for something greater. Was Lucius's rise to fame driven by his desire for revenge against his father's empire, or was he simply using the arena as a means to escape the deadly politics of Rome? One of the most powerful forces in the gladiatorial games wasn't just the swords or the blood, it was the reputation. Reputation could make or break a gladiator's career, and Lucius, despite his royal lineage, had to earn his place in the arena. His reputation was shaped not only by his victories, but by the political forces that sought to control him. Gladiators were often pawns in a larger game of power, but Lucius had the chance to manipulate that game to his advantage. But as Lucius' fame grew, so did the dangers. The more popular a gladiator became, the more enemies they made. In a world where power and respect were won through blood, Lucius was in a constant battle, not just for survival, but for control over his destiny. Could he rise above the deadly politics of Rome, or was he doomed to remain a puppet in a larger scheme? Lucius wasn't just fighting for personal glory. His fame in the arena became a tool for survival. Gladiators could gain a taste of freedom and wealth, but it came at a high price. In a society where loyalty was often bought and sold, Lucius's fame wasn't just about winning battles. It was about gaining influence in a world where those who controlled the games held the real power. Lucius had another challenge to face: his own reputation as the son of Commodus. The brutal rule of his father cast a long shadow over his life. How could Lucius escape the legacy of madness and violence left behind by his father, the emperor who thought he was a god? Was his rise in the arena an act of defiance, or was he simply playing the game for his own survival? As Lucius's journey unfolded, his struggle wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional. How did he cope with the constant violence, the bloodshed, and the brutal politics of the arena? Did he embrace the violence, or did he question it? What did it take for Lucius to transform from a royal heir to a gladiator, and ultimately to a man who could take control of his own fate? Lucius's time in the arena changed him in ways that no one could have anticipated. Gladiators were supposed to be machines of destruction, trained to fight and kill, but Lucius was different. His experience in the arena didn't just shape his skills as a fighter, it transformed his understanding of power, survival, and what it meant to be a man. By the end of his journey, Lucius had become more than just a gladiator. He had become a symbol of survival, transformation, and defiance. His story teaches us that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most profound legacies. Lucius's journey wasn't just about fighting for glory or revenge. It was about fighting for his life, his future, and his legacy. The story of Lucius is a reminder that reputation can be more powerful than any sword, that survival can sometimes be the greatest victory, and that even in the most brutal environments, there's always the chance to rise above and create something greater than yourself. Lucius was the son of the infamous Emperor Commodus, a prince with royal blood, yet his path was far from the luxurious life one might expect of an heir to the Roman throne. Instead, Lucius found himself thrust into the brutal world of the gladiator arena. But what made him different from all the other gladiators? Lucius was more than just a fighter in the arena. He was a player in a dangerous political game. As the son of a mad emperor, his survival depended not just on his skills with a sword, but on navigating the treacherous waters of Roman power and influence. For Lucius, fame in the arena came with a heavy cost. Gladiators were not just fighters, they were symbols, tools for power, and pawns in a game where their lives were controlled by the whims of the elite. But Lucius's rise to fame wasn't just about winning fights, it was about his reputation. In ancient Rome, reputation was everything. It could make you a hero or a villain, and it could decide whether you lived or died. Lucius's reputation was tied to his father's brutal rule, and it haunted him in the arena. But Lucius wasn't just fighting for glory, he was fighting for survival. The gladiatorial games were much more than brutal combat. They were a way of life, and they had a deeper, darker significance. Gladiators weren't just entertainment, they were a tool for the ruling elite to maintain control and show power. Lucius, trapped in this deadly game, had to prove himself not only as a fighter, but as someone who could survive the political manipulations of the Roman elite. It's easy to think of gladiators as nothing more than mindless warriors, but the reality is far more complex. Gladiators like Lucius didn't just fight beasts and criminals. They fought each other, and their rivalries were often more dangerous than the battles with animals or slaves. The rivalries between gladiators weren't just about personal animosities. They were about status, power, and survival. Lucius's greatest battles weren't just in the arena. They were fought behind the scenes, where politics and power determined who lived and who died. What most people don't realize is that gladiators could rise from nothing to become famous, but that fame came at a price. Gladiators were traded, used, and discarded once their usefulness was over. Lucius, despite his royal blood, was no exception. Fame in the arena was fleeting. Gladiators who outlived their usefulness were tossed aside, forgotten, and replaced. The question becomes, did Lucius see his fame as a blessing or a curse? Was it worth the price? Lucius' journey through the arena was also a journey of transformation. It wasn't just about surviving the battles or rising to fame. It was about changing himself, becoming something more than the prince who who had been locked away in his father's shadow. The more Lucius fought, the more he realized that his survival depended not just on physical strength, but on mental resilience. Was he still the same person who had been born into royal privilege, or had the brutal world of the arena changed him forever? But Lucius's path to fame wasn't just about survival. It was about manipulation, and the question is, who was manipulating whom? Gladiators were pawns in the political game of ancient Rome. Their battles were not just about entertainment. They were about controlling the masses, sending a message to the people, and keeping the powerful in control. Lucius found himself in the middle of this game, where every victory and every defeat was part of a much bigger plan. But could he manipulate the system to his advantage? Could he use the arena as a stepping stone for something bigger than himself? There's one thing that many don't know about gladiators. They followed an unwritten code. Gladiators had to live by rules that kept them alive in the arena. But what if Lucius didn't follow that code? What if he broke the rules to fight for something greater? As he rose to fame, Lucius faced a difficult choice. Would he continue to play by the gladiator's code, or would he break free and become something more? For Lucius, the bloodshed in the arena wasn't just about fighting for survival. It was about grappling with the violence that defined the Roman Empire. Gladiators were bred for bloodshed, but how did they cope with the violence that surrounded them? For Lucius, the constant violence in the arena wasn't just something to endure. It was something that changed him. What did the blood of the arena do to his soul? And was Lucius ever able to find peace? Or did the violence define him for the rest of his life? Lucius's ultimate challenge was more than just surviving in the arena. It was about fighting for something greater, his freedom. Gladiators lived for the day when they might be free, but that freedom came with a heavy cost. It wasn't just about winning battles. It was about surviving the political game that surrounded the arena. But could Lucius ever break free from the chains that bound him to the gladiatorial games? And what sacrifices would he have to make to gain that freedom? The final act of Lucius's journey isn't what most people would expect. His story didn't end in the arena. It ended in a way that changed the course of Roman history forever. But was Lucius's legacy one of triumph or tragedy? What does his story teach us about the nature of power, survival, and ambition? Was Lucius a hero, a villain, or something much more complicated? As Lucius's journey comes to an end, we realize that his story is about more than just gladiators and emperors. It's about transformation, survival, and the complexity of human ambition. Lucius's story teaches us that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most profound legacies. It reminds us that power isn't just about who you are. It's about how you play the game. Lucius's rise in the arena wasn't just about fighting for glory. It was about fighting for a future that would change everything. Lucius's time in the arena was not just a fight for survival, but a battle for transformation. When he first stepped into the gladiatorial pit, he was just a prince, a royal heir to the violent throne of Commodus. But as he faced the grueling trials of the Colosseum, something inside him began to shift. He didn't just want to survive. He needed to change, to prove that he was more than just a puppet of his father's legacy. The transformation of Lucius wasn't about becoming a better gladiator. It was about reclaiming his identity, his power, and his future. At the start, Lucius may have been a prince in name, but inside the arena, he was nothing more than another gladiator, facing death with each battle. Gladiators were often thought of as mere tools for the entertainment of the masses. They were glorified slaves, often betrayed by the same elite they fought for. Lucius, however, was in a unique position. He didn't have to play by the rules of the Gladiator Code. He had a chance to make his own path, to shape his own destiny. But how? Was it even possible to turn a life of forced servitude into one of true power? Could a prince, a man born to rule, really thrive in a world built on violence, manipulation, and bloodshed? It was not just about the physical fights in the Colosseum. It was about the internal battles. Lucius had to wrestle with his own sense of identity. Was he still the son of Commodus, or had the arena changed him into something more? And the stakes were incredibly high. Gladiators were given nothing but their lives, and even those could be taken away with one wrong move. But Lucius was fighting for something greater than just his life. He fought for respect, for the right to stand apart from his father's twisted legacy. But even more than that, Lucius wanted to prove that his fate didn't have to be decided by birthright alone. Could he reshape his future, or would the blood of the arena forever define him? To understand the depth of Lucius's transformation, you have to look at the man he was before entering the arena. Lucius grew up in the shadows of Commodus' cruelty. Raised in luxury, but constantly overshadowed by his father's madness, he was kept out of the public eye, away from the throne, and away from power. Commodus, a man who thought of himself as a god, took every opportunity to solidify his control over Rome. But Lucius wasn't just an observer. He was a royal heir trapped by the weight of his father's rule. His transition from a royal prince to a gladiator wasn't just a shift in occupation. It was a shift in identity. Gladiators, especially those born into royalty, were often seen as tools for entertainment and control. But for Lucius, that was never going to be enough. He didn't just want to fight. He wanted to break free from his father's legacy. He wanted to reshape the narrative of his life. The arena, brutal and unforgiving as it was, offered him the unique chance to do so. But could he really fight his way out of the prison of his identity? Or would he remain Commodus' son forever, trapped in the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum? One of the most striking aspects of Lucius' Lucius's transformation was his ability to rise above the typical gladiator experience. Gladiators were often nothing more than disposable fighters, their only value determined by their ability to entertain and survive. Lucius, though, used his time in the arena to learn not just how to fight, but how to control his destiny. Gladiators, with their codes and survival instincts, lived by an unspoken set of rules. But Lucius didn't just follow the rules, he bent them to his will. At first, it might seem like Lucius was simply a pawn in a much larger game. After all, he was thrust into the arena by political forces beyond his control. But as time passed, Lucius began to realize that the arena wasn't just a place of forced servitude, it was a stage for reinvention. He had power in ways most gladiators didn't. He had intelligence, he had skill, and most importantly, he had ambition. Lucius's time in the arena was not about becoming the best fighter. It was about becoming something greater than a gladiator. In the Colosseum, Lucius was not just fighting for survival. He was fighting for respect. His fame, his victories, and even his defeats were not just about entertaining the crowds. They were about building a reputation that would outlive his time as a gladiator. In Rome, reputation was everything, and for Lucius, it was the key to reshaping his identity. But Lucius's transformation didn't come without its struggles. Gladiators faced constant physical and emotional tolls. They were pushed to their limits, both mentally and physically, and for many, the arena became a prison from which there was no escape. Lucius, however, refused to let that happen. Each battle in the arena, each wound he sustained was a lesson, each one bringing him closer to the man he needed to become. But even as he changed, there was always the question, could he escape the shadow of his father's madness? Could he truly transform into something more than a gladiator? The arena offered Lucius more than just bloodshed. It offered him a place where he could prove his worth. The brutal, unforgiving nature of the games gave him the opportunity to show that he was more than just a product of his royal lineage. He wasn't just the son of Commodus. He was Lucius, the gladiator who could take on any challenge and survive. In a world where survival often meant submission, Lucius fought to take control of his fate. Each victory wasn't just about outlasting an opponent. It was about redefining what it meant to be royal, to be a gladiator, and to be a survivor. As Lucius's journey continued, the real question became whether he could ever truly leave behind the life of a gladiator. Was it possible to escape the games, or would they define him forever? The blood of the arena had changed him, but could he change the course of his destiny before it was too late? What would be the ultimate test for Lucius's transformation, and what price would he have to pay to truly escape the arena's grip? In the end, Lucius's journey was not just about survival or power, it was about transformation. Would he be remembered as a hero, a gladiator, or something much more complex? Lucius's journey through the brutal world of gladiators wasn't just about survival, it was about something much more complex. His time in the arena didn't simply shape his body, it reshaped his very essence. Destined to live a life of luxury as the son of the notorious Commodus, Lucius found himself thrust into a world where power was determined by the sword, not the crown. The change was slow but undeniable. Every fight, every battle scar, every strategy he devised in the pit pushed him closer to a transformation that would ultimately lead him to reshape his destiny. But was it a transformation for the better? Did Lucius evolve into a man worthy of admiration, or did he become something darker, more dangerous, even more like his father than he would care to admit? And perhaps the most troubling question, could the brutal gladiatorial code, the very set of rules that governed survival, actually be the source of this metamorphosis? You see, gladiators weren't just warriors, they were pawns, cogs in a massive machine designed to entertain and subjugate. Some fought to live, others fought for fame, but there was always a cost. The gladiator's code wasn't just about honor, it was about survival, and survival often meant breaking the rules of society. For Lucius, this meant becoming something more than just a gladiator. He was a royal heir raised under a violent father's rule, and he had a unique chance to use the gladiatorial system to his advantage. The gladiator's code itself was a complicated set of unspoken rules that guided the lives of those condemned to fight. It wasn't just about combat, it was about how one lived, how one survived in the world of death and blood. For most gladiators, survival meant never questioning the system, never challenging the arena. But Lucius wasn't like other gladiators. His time in the arena wasn't merely about victory, it was about transformation, and he began to see that in order to escape the shackles of his past and his royal blood, he would need to break free from the code that held everyone else captive. Gladiators followed a simple rule: fight, survive, repeat. But Lucius quickly realized that for him to gain true power and control over his future, he had to rewrite that rulebook. His journey wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional. Fighting in the Colosseum wasn't merely a matter of endurance, it was a matter of will. Will he fall prey to the same violence and brutality that dominated his father's reign, or will he transcend that blood-soaked world and redefine what it meant to be a ruler? Here's where things get complicated. Lucius did not blindly follow the gladiator's code. While most gladiators were molded by the system, Lucius used it to create a new narrative. Each fight was an opportunity for him to make a statement, not just to the crowds, but to himself. In the Colosseum, he was free to test who he really was, beyond his royal title and his father's oppressive legacy. But in doing so, he began to understand the true price of freedom. It's true that Lucius's path was one of survival, but it was also a path of sacrifice. sacrifice. In order to survive, he would have to make choices that would forever alter his relationship with both the world around him and the man he used to be. The very Gladiator Code that kept others shackled was the same code that would test him in ways that most could never imagine. And in order to emerge victorious, Lucius would have to break from it completely. But was that enough? To survive the arena, one must embrace its bloodlust. But can that ever be reconciled with the ideals of honor or even humanity? This was the true battle Lucius faced. Every blow he struck, every life he took, every moment he spent in the arena brought him closer to his goal, freedom. But at what cost? Could a man truly escape the violence of the Colosseum unscathed? Could he remain unchanged by the brutality that surrounded him? Lucius's journey also reveals a critical lesson about power. It doesn't come freely, even for a prince. In his bid to break free, Lucius realized that being a gladiator wasn't just about mastering combat. It was about mastering the system, understanding how to navigate the politics, how to play the game. Each gladiator was part of a greater narrative, manipulated by those in power, whether the emperor or the game's organizers. Lucius learned that in order to control his future, he needed to take control of the game itself. But here's where the true complexity of his transformation lies. Lucius, despite his royal birth, did not see the Gladiator's Code as a set of limitations. Instead, he saw it as a tool, one that could be used to both survive and ascend. The problem was, this new identity he was crafting for himself. Was it worth it? Was he becoming more like his father than he cared to admit? Was his struggle for freedom becoming a justification for the very violence and tyranny he sought to escape? As Lucius moved deeper into the world of gladiators, he found that the very act of fighting, of putting his life on the line, became an expression of his new identity. The arena was no longer just a place of death, it was a place of rebirth. The blood spilled on its sands wasn't just the price of survival, it was the price of his transformation. Lucius's ultimate decision, to embrace or break the Gladiator Code, wasn't just a choice about honor, it was a choice about who he would become. Was he destined to be another cog in the machine, doomed to live out the violent legacy of his father, Commodus? Or would he rise above that legacy, using the code to create a new identity for himself? Lucius's transformation is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It shows that even in the darkest places, amidst the blood and violence of the Colosseum, there is room for change, for reinvention. But it also serves as a warning. Freedom comes at a cost, and sometimes the very tools we use to escape our past can lead us right back into the same darkness we sought to escape. Lucius's story asks a deeper question. What does it mean to be free? Is freedom merely the absence of chains, or is it the ability to shape one's destiny, regardless of the circumstances? For Lucius, the transformation from royal heir to gladiator wasn't just about surviving in the arena, it was about surviving the battle within himself. And in that battle, the Gladiator Code became not just a set of rules to follow, but the very means by which he could rewrite his future. The Colosseum wasn't just a battlefield, it was a crucible that molded men into something else entirely. Gladiators, often considered mere tools for entertainment, were forced to confront more than physical challenges. For Lucius, the son of Emperor Commodus, the arena was a place of blood, violence, and brutality, but it was also a place of transformation. When you think of gladiators, you think of fighters, warriors trained to battle to the death. But Lucius's time in the arena was about more than just survival. He was born a prince, destined to inherit an empire, but found himself thrust into the brutal life or death world of gladiatorial combat. This wasn't just about the fight, it was about something much deeper. Lucius was never meant to fight in the arena. His father, Commodus, was notorious for his violent and erratic rule. Yet Lucius, the heir to the throne, was expected to one day lead Rome. But when fate intervened, Lucius was forced into the arena, where the real fight began. His transformation from royal heir to gladiator was not something he had planned, nor was it something that could be undone. Imagine being thrust into a world where every decision could be your last. Lucius had grown up with privilege, wealth, power, and prestige, but in the arena, those things meant nothing. Here, the only thing that mattered was survival. Every gladiator had a choice, to embrace the fight or to perish. Lucius chose to embrace it, but was it simply out of necessity, or was there something more? Gladiators had a code, a set of rules that governed how they survived in the arena. This code wasn't just about combat, it was about navigating the politics of life and death. But Lucius's journey was different. As a prince, he wasn't bound by the same laws that governed ordinary gladiators. His transformation wasn't just about learning to fight, it was about learning to survive the deadly politics of Rome, a place where alliances were fleeting and betrayal was common. And what made Lucius's path different from the other gladiators was his background. He wasn't just a warrior in the traditional sense. He was the son of an emperor, the product of a blood-soaked legacy. Colosseum's bloodbath wasn't just a test of strength, it was a test of his ability to navigate the complex web of power that had trapped him. As Lucius fought in the arena, he wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting to redefine himself. In the brutal world of gladiators, there was only one way to make a name for yourself, by being victorious over and over again. But for Lucius, that victory came with a price. Each battle took him further away from the prince he had once been, and the bloodshed of the arena slowly began to shape him into something else entirely. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were entertainers, pawns in a much larger political game. For Lucius, the Colosseum became a place not just for survival but for strategy. The arena was a stage, and every fight was a performance meant to secure his place in a world dominated by the whims of the emperor. But what happened when a gladiator's fight for freedom turned into something far more dangerous? What if the code that governed gladiators wasn't just about survival, but power? Lucius's journey reveals the true cost of fame in the arena. In a world where gladiators were bought, sold, and discarded when they were no longer useful, Lucius' fame came at a price. But this fame wasn't just about glory, it was about manipulation, about using the arena to climb the ladder of Roman politics. Gladiators who became too famous, too powerful, often faced a different kind of danger, one that was far more insidious than the physical threats they faced in the arena. Fame in the Colosseum meant that you were valuable, but it also meant that you were a target. You couldn't survive the games forever. In fact, most gladiators didn't. Was fame truly a blessing for Lucius, or had he become a pawn in a game much bigger than he could control? What many don't realize is that fame in the Colosseum wasn't just about surviving. It was about shaping your identity in a world that dehumanized you. Gladiators were forced to fight, but they were also forced to conform to a code, a set of unwritten rules that dictated how they lived, how they fought, and even how they died. But what if Lucius chose to break that code? What if, in doing so, he broke free from the system that had kept him trapped in the first place? The blood of the arena wasn't just literal, it was psychological. Lucius didn't just fight for glory, he fought to survive, and in the process, he began to lose pieces of himself. Every victory came at a cost, not just to his body, but to his soul. In the end, Lucius had to ask himself, was he still the prince he had once been, or had he become something else? The true test of a gladiator wasn't just about physical endurance, it was about mental strength. To survive in the Colosseum, you had to become something else. A warrior, a performer, a symbol. Lucius's transformation wasn't just about becoming stronger, it was about becoming someone different. But as he rose to power in the arena, did he lose what made him human? Every gladiator faces a moment when the fight becomes personal. For Lucius, that moment came when he realized that survival wasn't enough. It wasn't even about victory anymore. The fight became a test of his will, his identity, and his future. Could he truly escape the brutal world of the Colosseum, or would he be forever trapped in the cycle of violence and bloodshed? Lucius's journey wasn't just about surviving the arena, it was about transforming into someone capable of breaking free from the very system that had created him. But there's one question that looms over Lucius' story. Did he ever truly escape? Or was the arena, with all its blood and glory, the only place where he could truly be free? In the end, Lucius's transformation became a metaphor for the power and corruption of the arena. His fight wasn't just for survival, it was for a new identity, one that would allow him to break the chains of his past and shape his future. The arena for him represented a deeper journey, a path not only of survival but of transformation. It was where his past collided with his future, and where every fight he endured would shape the man he would become. Every gladiator faces an ultimate challenge, but for Lucius, that challenge was far more than physical. It was a test of everything he stood for, everything he was willing to lose, and everything he was prepared to sacrifice. As Lucius stepped into the arena, he was more than just the son of Commodus. He was a prince with a legacy that would not be easily erased. His challenge, however, wasn't just about survival. The stakes were higher than most could imagine. Gladiators in the arena were forced to fight not only for their lives, but for their very souls. Every swing of the sword, every drop of blood spilled, was a reminder that the only way out was through. There was no turning back. What did it mean for Lucius to fight for survival in an environment designed to kill him? Would he remain the same royal heir he once was? Or would the arena transform him into something else entirely? Was the battle for his life simply about overcoming his enemies? Or was the true enemy something deeper, something inside himself? As Lucius faced his ultimate test, his journey in the arena was about more than just physical strength. It was about overcoming the dark side of himself that had been born from his father's rule. For most gladiators, the arena was a place of terror, but for Lucius, it became a symbol of his struggle for identity. In a way, every fight was his ultimate challenge, not to conquer other men, but to conquer himself. Every moment he spent in the sands of the Colosseum brought him closer to a decision he would one day have to make: to continue as the heir to Commodus, or to step away from it all and forge a new path, one that was his alone. The journey was not without its doubts. Was Lucius simply a victim of his circumstances, trapped in the deadly game of survival? Or was he a player willing to sacrifice anything, including his soul, to secure his future? The line between hero and villain blurred for Lucius as his reputation grew within the arena. He was no longer just a prince or a gladiator. He became a symbol of power, survival, and transformation. But here's where the mystery deepens. Lucius's ultimate challenge wasn't just about surviving the next fight or conquering the arena's fierce rivalries. It was about embracing something greater than the bloodshed, a final test that would redefine him. The stakes weren't just personal, they were political. Lucius's final challenge would determine not just his future, but the future of Rome itself. Imagine the shock of stepping into the arena, knowing that each fight might be your last, but also knowing that the fate of an empire could rest on your survival. The stakes weren't just about personal glory or wealth, they were about shifting the balance of power within Rome. Lucius knew that his path forward wasn't just shaped by his strength in the arena, but by justify his ability to navigate the deadly politics of the empire. As the tension in the Colosseum escalated, the questions grew. Could Lucius withstand the pressure of his heritage and the games that played out before him? Would the bloodshed of the arena push him to his breaking point, or would it be the very thing that allowed him to finally break free? Each moment in the arena took him closer to the final revelation about his true identity and his ultimate goal. What happened to Lucius in the arena would change the course of his life and the empire forever. But the journey wasn't over. The arena was the stage for Lucius's transformation, but there was more to come. How would his ultimate challenge play out, and what would it mean for his legacy? Was it a final test of strength, or a deeper, more profound struggle to find meaning in a world filled with violence and power? This was Lucius's ultimate challenge, a journey into the heart of power, politics, and survival. He would face enemies who were as much a part of the system as the blood-soaked arena itself, and in that final fateful moment, Lucius would discover what it truly meant to be free. Lucius's ultimate challenge in the arena was far from just a test of physical endurance. It was a defining moment in his journey, a moment that would shape his future, his legacy, and even the very course of Roman history. Gladiators, by their very nature, are expected to fight and survive, but Lucius's challenge wasn't just about surviving the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum. It was about what those fights meant beyond the immediate moment, what they would cost him, and what he stood to gain. It's easy to think of gladiators as mere fighters, beasts of war pitted against one another for the entertainment of the masses. But Lucius's challenge was unique. He wasn't just a gladiator. He was a prince, born into a life of luxury and power, yet thrown into the most brutal game in ancient Rome. His struggles, therefore, carried far more weight than those of a typical gladiator. At first glance, his life in the arena might seem like the worst punishment a royal heir could endure. The bloodshed, the violence, the loss of his status and identity. It would have been enough to crush most men. But Lucius wasn't most men. His story wasn't about descending into madness and despair like many gladiators. Instead, it was about something much more profound: self-transformation. Was his ultimate challenge one of survival, or was it something more? He was caught in a web of political intrigue and power struggles that extended far beyond the Colosseum. The true test of his character was whether he could navigate the treacherous world of Roman politics and power while fighting to stay alive in the arena. Could he survive the games and the betrayals, all while maintaining his humanity? The tension escalates when you realize the stakes weren't just about his life in the arena. They were about the future of Rome itself. Lucius's fight wasn't just against his fellow gladiators. It was against the very system that had placed him in this position. The Colosseum, the blood-stained sands, and the political game outside the arena all converged into one final test. Lucius needed to find a way to reconcile his royal blood with his identity as a gladiator. The outcome of his challenge would determine whether he would live or die, and whether he would ever escape the shadow of his father, Commodus. Lucius's battle was as much internal as it was external. While others fought for gold and glory, he fought for freedom. His true challenge wasn't just the physical dangers of the arena. It was overcoming the personal demons that came with his royal bloodline. Was he destined to live in the shadow of his tyrannical father, Commodus, or would he rise above his legacy to define his own future? This struggle within Lucius reached its boiling point when he realized that the ultimate challenge he faced wasn't in the arena itself, but in overcoming the system that created the arena. How could a man who had been born into royalty and power face such a horrific reality and emerge unscathed? How could he fight for freedom and transformation in a system designed to break him? As Lucius faced his final challenge, the Colosseum became a place not just of battle but of revelation. Here, the true nature of his struggle was revealed. Each swing of his sword, each drop of blood spilled, wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for his future. His battles would not only determine his fate, but would also shape the very course of Rome's future. Could Lucius escape the traps laid out by the empire and his father, or would he be swallowed by the very system that had put him in this position? In the heat of battle, Lucius realized something crucial. It wasn't the final test of strength or skill that would define his legacy, but his ability to rise above the violence and manipulation around him. The ultimate challenge for Lucius was not merely surviving. It was about transcending the role that fate had thrust upon him. Could he break free from the chains of his bloodline and fight for something greater? As his journey progressed, the answer became clear. Lucius's ultimate challenge wasn't just about surviving the arena. It was about surviving the empire. Could he navigate the treacherous political waters of Rome, using his gladiatorial experiences as a stepping stone to reshape his own future? Or would he succumb to the violence and corruption surrounding him? With each passing day in the Colosseum, Lucius's transformation deepened. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was evolving. Every fight, every act of survival chipped away at the person he had been and brought out the warrior he was destined to become. And as he faced his final test, Lucius had only one question left to answer. Could he remain true to himself while fighting for freedom, or would he lose himself in the blood-soaked sands of the arena forever? Get ready, because Lucius's journey is about to take a turn you won't expect. His ultimate challenge awaits, and the revelations that follow will change everything you thought you knew about the gladiatorial games, the empire, and Lucius himself. The final act is about to begin, and the stakes are higher than ever. What will Lucius' legacy be, and what price will he pay for his freedom? Lucius's legacy, often overshadowed by his infamous father Commodus, takes a surprising turn after his gladiatorial journey. Most people know Commodus as a cruel and eccentric emperor, but what about Lucius, his son? He wasn't just another royal heir. He was shaped by blood, combat, and the politics of Rome in ways most could never imagine. But Lucius's story didn't end with the sands of the arena. Far from it. Imagine the arena not just as a place of violent spectacle, but as the crucible where a royal heir transformed into a man of legend. His story is one of survival, yes, but also of self-discovery, revenge, and ultimately his mark on Roman history. What happened when the prince, bound by a dark legacy, faced the ultimate test? And why, when it seemed like he had it all, luxury, power, and prestige, did he end up fighting in the arena for his life? The answer lies in the shocking final act of Lucius's story. His legacy didn't end with a sword raised in victory or a final battle won. It ended in something much more profound. What could possibly be greater than the fight for freedom in the Colosseum? What if Lucius's final act was one of moral reckoning rather than a victory of strength? You might think that gladiators were simply warriors, fighting for survival, fame, or their freedom, but the truth, it's much darker. Lucius, in the end, became more than a gladiator. He became the embodiment of transformation, shifting from a royal heir to a man reshaping his destiny in the shadows of Rome's political intrigue. Was he fighting for glory, revenge, or something far more complicated, far more profound? This is where Lucius' transformation really begins. By the time he faced his final challenge, Lucius was no longer the naive son of a ruler. He had seen firsthand the consequences of power, the ruthlessness of Rome's politics, and the cost of survival in the Colosseum. But what he hadn't anticipated was the true price of changing his fate. The real challenge wasn't the arena itself, but the realization that his destiny was tied not just to his family's legacy, but to the entire future of Rome. As the story of Lucius unfolds, the stakes escalate, drawing us deeper into the web of political power, personal revenge, and moral sacrifice. The most shocking element of Lucius's journey, true test, wasn't in the battles he fought in the arena. It was in the choices he made in the shadows of the imperial court. Lucius's final act was not just a personal victory, nor was it a typical gladiator's end. It was something that would change the course of history. His actions would echo through Rome, affecting not just his legacy, but the future of the empire itself. But how did Lucius, once trapped in the blood-stained sands of the Colosseum, manage to break free? What was his ultimate act of rebellion, and why did it change the very fabric of Roman history? Lucius's final chapter didn't just end with a sword raised high. It began the transformation of the gladiator prince into something far more important. Someone who defied his bloodline, his upbringing, and the very system that had sought to crush him. The gladiator's fate wasn't just determined by the weapons he wielded, but by the legacy he chose to build for the future. Get ready, because Lucius's ultimate challenge is one that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about Roman politics, power, and legacy. His story is far from what you might expect, and the payoff will change the way you view the gladiators, the emperors, and even the empire itself. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.